And we wait. And we are live.
All right.
Internet.
Anything awkward I say from this point on is forever recorded on the internet. No pressure.
Yes. No. I can edit the video after the
Oh, okay. All right, great.
Well, I can. It doesn't mean I will. Alrighty, Linda. I am we have people coming in. The chat is available. Give Linda and me some love in the chat. Linder, is that a nickname we need to start using from now on?
Yeah, I'll accept Linder.
Linder, okay.
I mean, a lot of the people we work with now have British accents, so I sound like Linder, even if they're saying Linda.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. I'm just going to kick this off because we have a lot to go through. So, hello, everybody. Oh, I should really hit the button that turns the screen share on. It helps so much. Okay. There we go. Yay! Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the SwiftKick Show. My name is Kevin Griffin. I am the owner of SwiftKick. And if you've never heard of SwiftKick before, we are a software training and consulting company based out of Chesapeake, Virginia. I have made my career kind of just coming up in the community, giving back, speaking at user groups, conferences, different events around the world. And I just enjoy doing this sort of thing. So SwiftKick is all about pushing that mission forward to make software developers just better at what they do. And it doesn't matter how you got into it. Doesn't matter what you're doing as a developer. We want to help make you better. We're on the social, the Twitters, the LinkedIns, the YouTubes, and the Facebooks. No Instagram or anything like that right now. But we would love some social love if you're willing to give it, especially the YouTube channel. We're so close to hitting our 100 subscriber mark on YouTube, and that's the magic number where you can get a real URL. So I'm not youtube.com/channel/A523XBC. I can be a real channel like all the other YouTubes. We have some great content coming up, continuing our schedule. Next week, we're going to have, or not next week, but in 2 weeks, we're going to have Josh Carlisle kind of expanding on the topic of serverless. Linda is going to give us a little introduction tonight. Josh is going to come and talk specifically about Azure functions. So if you're a Microsoft person and you just want to learn more how the Microsoft group does serverless, Josh Carlisle is going to come talk to us about that. I actually saw a version of this talk last night, and it was fantastic. And I'm hoping Josh brings the same level of awesomeness to our show. I have 3 other gentlemen that are joining us, Encore, John, and Matt. All of them have no idea what they're going to talk about. So if you have any suggestions of what their topic should be, let me know, and I'll just pass them on to them.
With serverless, we should just do serverless every 2 weeks.
Serverless. So this is the Serverless Show. That's probably already taken by someone.
Yeah, it is.
But you don't care about all those men. You care about Linda. So my guest today is Linda Nichols. She's going to be talking about serverless of all things. And Linda, before we jump into your talk, I'm going to turn off that screen.
I was looking at infinite me's and I was just getting lost.
Yeah, it's the portal. Well, before we begin, I'd like to ask guests a couple questions just to learn a little bit more about you, so folks have some context as they come into your session. First of all, anyone who doesn't know who Linda Nichols is, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you work for, and what exactly do you do?
All right, awesome. Yeah, I'll just skip past this slide in the presentation later.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I am here local in Norfolk, Virginia, which is fairly close to where Kevin lives in his shed quarters.
You live that way.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah. Somewhere not on the water. So I work for CloudReach. I'm a cloud enablement leader, which means I am a manager, and I manage all of software development, which is our one of our new capabilities, and that falls under app modernization. And I have a team of about 10 people so far. We are hiring more people. If you're interested and working for me sounds good, then let me know. Hit me up on Twitter or Slack if we're in a Slack room together.
And
but
if you're in the chat and you work for Linda, say how awesome of a boss she is.
That's right. Or if you're Troy and you don't work for me, but you work with me, you can also say that I'm awesome. So CloudReach is an innovation and enablement company for cloud. So historically, we have done a little bit more of lift and shift, helping move companies from on-prem solutions to in the cloud. Now we're focusing a little bit more on, once you're in the cloud, what do you do? How do you, break apart your monolith? How do you modernize? How do you go more cloud native? How do you take care of this new system that now exists within a cloud environment? And so that's where we come in, and we're all experts on software development and infrastructure and all things cloud.
Awesome. Now, what's your origin story? How did you even get into software development?
Yeah, so this is not all that beautiful a story, but I was not going to make any money as an artist. And I had to learn how to repair my own computer while I was in high school and college. And I decided, okay, like this pays me $50 an hour, and drawing portraits of people's pets pays me $5 total, fixed price.
That seems like a no-brainer. And you can still do that on the side as a hobby if you really wanted to draw pictures.
Exactly. And to be honest, I mean, I wasn't the most groundbreaking artist ever, and I was not going to be famous, even be able to like feed myself. In college, I couldn't even buy myself a latte, which was $2.25 at that point. So yeah, I kind of got into it. I got a certification, A+ certification, which at the time was DOS and Windows. And I just saw some posting for a job on a help desk, and they required an A+ certification. And so I applied for the job and said, hey, I know how to repair computers. I think I could work on this help desk. I'm pretty good with people. And so they interviewed me, and they hired me because historically everyone who had done that role could not get along with the other government workers. And they said, well, we're pretty sure like you know what you're doing because you passed this test, and we feel like you can get along with government people. So here's your job. Fantastic. Yeah. And so that was forever ago. And yeah, I learned to code on the job there and just really liked it, and liked the environment and people better than I liked art school. So.
Awesome. And now you're with us, and you're in charge of a whole bunch of people.
Yeah. Now I've made the transition to management. Not fully, like I still have opinions and I still want to be involved, but I like managing people and watching people do cool stuff and sort of be able to be like, well, like maybe that was my idea, or I let somebody have the time to do that cool thing. I can still stay involved or something and just see everyone grow.
So outside of your technical role and all the cool development stuff you do, what other hobbies do you have?
Well, I do still like to draw and paint, and I like to sew, and I like running too, when I am not being lazy about doing it, I guess. But yeah, if I'm not coding and I'm not doing any work and I'm not, doing some open source thing, nothing related to technology, then I really like to sew. And I like cats. I don't think I have any cats in this presentation today, but usually there's a cameo. Yeah. I mean, right. Well, I'm live on video. A cat could show up.
You never know.
Great.
So you were talking about that you basically pay people to go off and do cool stuff. What technology do you kind of consider the coolest thing you've seen so far?
Yeah, so
what do you get really excited about?
Yeah, so I have to give Blaine and Paul some love right now because they've done a really cool Azure app that is facial recognition, emotions, and emotion API, and it's like a little game where it tells you to, do some certain emotion, and then it rates you. And there's another version of it that gives you Guardians of the Galaxy rewards for your faces. And yeah, it's a super cool project. Everybody in the company is loving it, and we're able to use, Azure Functions, our typical cloud native kind of stack that we would use is demonstrated in this app. So yeah, that's been a really like fun project that I did zero coding on. I'd like to say I was involved somehow, but really Blaine and Paul did all the work.
I've seen that. I've seen that app. It was really awesome. So
yeah,
maybe we could get Blaine, because we've already had Paul on the show. Maybe we get Blaine to come on and talk to us about that app. So
yeah,
and you just dropped a link in the chat, so everyone in the chat can go take a look at it.
That's right. Don't do it now because I'm on stage now.
No, but in about an hour.
That's right.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering my questions. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off and let you do what you do best.
All right, cool.
All right.
All right, I'm going to screen share my little presentation. First, it'll be infinite. It does. All right, awesome. Kevin, can you see this on your side, just as a check?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So this presentation today is a little bit of a combination of some of my other presentations and maybe a little bit of new opinions and things that I've learned, while I've been on this serverless journey. And for those of you who haven't seen my Breaking Up with Your Server talk, I really like to include Taylor Swift in my presentations about serverless because, she has her own opinions about breakups. And, it'll become relevant as the story goes on. But really, so this journey of talking about serverless is really about a year old. I started kind of playing around with some cloud native development and some serverless, maybe like the previous fall, and I decided I wanted to do a lightning talk about serverless and kind of these fun little projects that I was doing and this quick prototyping I was doing in the serverless environment. And so I signed up for HR Nug, which is Kevin's local .NET user group, and I did a talk on serverless bots that had a Valentine's Day theme. So this talk is a little bit of an update on that, and including some of the other talks that I've done over the last year. So, as Kevin said, I am Linda Nichols. I am Lina Lou on the internet. On Twitter, I think I'm most likely to respond. Twitter, LinkedIn. I don't Snapchat, so this is not me on Snapchat. It's somebody else. I don't even know how to use Snapchat. And I organize the local JavaScript user group, Norfolk.js. And then in the summertime, we have a event that's called NodeBots Day, where we celebrate JavaScript robotics. It's a one-day event for the entire family, and it is always the last Saturday in July. It's happening again this year. We had close to 200 people last year, and it's been growing. It's completely free. Learn how to program, learn how to do robotics. Very fun. And along with Kevin, I'm an organizer of RevolutionConf. RevolutionConf is coming back this May. Our call for proposals has ended. So the next step is we will be releasing all of the speakers for this year's event. So go buy your ticket now while it's inexpensive. And as I was saying before, I work for CloudReach. This is our teal color scheme, so I went away from the pink for a second. But these are just some images of some of the cool people I work with, some people that I previously worked with at ETA, and now, another like 490 people that I didn't previously know that I work with now that are also really into DevOps and development and innovation. And so they're included there. One of the bottom photos is from our kickoff in Portugal this year. Okay, so today we're going to talk about falling in love with serverless architecture. And I'm clearly already in love with it because I really like talking about it a lot. And I'm very passionate and I have lots of opinions. And those opinions are changing because the environment is moving very, very quickly. And even since last year when I first started talking about serverless, and a lot of people had no idea what I was talking about, they had sort of heard of AWS Lambda, But, at the time, Google Functions, I think, was in alpha. OpenWhisk was mostly unheard of, and serverless was focused all around AWS and Lambda. And so since my first talk a year ago, I've really kind of gone a little bit deeper working with serverless architecture, but also I've been kind of refining my definition of what I think it is and why I think it's really valuable and why I think really everyone can use it. So yeah, I mean, first you have to break up with your servers. You have to give up your idea of you deploy something and then you fully manage it. And really, I mean, it's not just even about on-prem versus cloud, because most of us developers don't have servers and mainframes in our houses that we physically manage. But it's about the fact that we're used to deploying something to Heroku. We're used to deploying something to AWS, maybe within EC2. But we're also used to having to have a certain amount of DevOps knowledge to be able to then manage that code. And also we have to have the money to deploy it. We're looking for free tiers everywhere where we can deploy these apps, even to prototype things. And we have to be prepared that once something goes to production, that we have to start adding money to it. And so that whole ecosystem is changing. So the story that I'm going to tell today has all of the pieces of a typical romance. And so I've already talked about breakups, but definitely decoupling, commitment, as in commitment to a certain cloud provider or library, or not committing at all, staying completely agnostic. Highly cohesive relationships, services that work together, services that are within a platform, services that are analogous on other platforms. High availability and dedication. Once you deploy something, it just stays up. You don't have to worry about it. It won't go down. If it goes down, everything else in the world is down too. And dedicated services. You're not managing anything. It exists in the cloud. Amazon, Microsoft, IBM are now managing your code and your services, and so it's a little bit less worry. And support and growth. You have people that are dedicated to supporting your application and your scalability. So in every serverless talk, we have to talk about what is serverless, because it's actually a made-up word. And so it's confusing. And it's kind of like when people were saying they were going to the cloud years ago, and we thought that was ridiculous. And then we had, the cartoons that had, a computer under someone's desk, and they're like, hey, look, it's the cloud. It's so super funny. And now, fast forward a few years later, I work for a company called CloudReach, and now we have serverless, which is our new catchy made-up marketing term that we just are using now. And, every CIO of every company gets their little CIO newsletter and magazine, and it's telling everyone they need to go serverless. And so they're going to ask you what that means. And so I'm going to talk about my extremely opinionated view of it. So yeah, serverless architecture has historically, and certainly a year ago when you said serverless architecture, it's like, oh, okay, you're using Lambda. But it's a little bit bigger picture. It's not about any platform or even any compute product. And really the really special thing about serverless architecture is about the events. At Serverless Conf Austin last year, Austin Collins did a keynote where he was talking about serverless framework and serverless as an architecture. And he said, it's really not about any of our products. It's not about my framework. It's not about Microsoft. It's not about IBM. It's about the events. It's about the fact that we have these functions running in the cloud. We have these services that are serverless, that are pay-as-you-go. There are all these other things we're going to talk about. But really the very, very special thing about this architecture is that it is based on services firing events that then execute functions. And so we're able to design these extremely decoupled systems that are made to work with each other, that they work in a way that's very different than we're used to, and we're having to kind of think about architecture in a completely different way. But while I'm saying that, we're still keeping true to heart all the things that we care about with good design, but we have new tools. And so, yeah, this is my current definition, or maybe one of my current definitions, which is that it is an event-driven system. And it is a system that you do not manage. You have code, they exist in containers, they're not yours, you don't manage them. And I'm acknowledging here that you're likely using a functions as a service product. You're likely using functions in the cloud. But you get into the situation where you're talking about some of the, like in the Google ecosystem, especially with Firebase, or Athena, which is kind of a serverless database or serverless query tool. And so in those cases, serverless is a little bit more descriptive of a system where you're not paying for it and it's more managed by someone else, but it's still event-driven. Firebase fires events, and those events can then be used to trigger other services within the cloud platform and also Google Functions. So let's talk about FaaS. Since this is really one of the building blocks of serverless architecture, and it's really something that developers really grabbed onto immediately, because we like the idea of having smaller pieces of code that we can deploy separately, and that way we're not trying to design a huge system that we're then deploying at once, and then we have to wait for lots and lots of updates that all depend on each other to deploy the system again. We like this idea of these small little stateless functions that you deploy and then you don't manage. You don't have to know anything about ops. You just write the code, and it's very fast and it's easy. And then you don't really pay much for it. And so that was really something that was revolutionary with Lambda, and has continued with the other services, is that they're metered billing. You only pay for the functions you use. So if you create a huge REST API, then chances are there are a lot of these API endpoints that really never get hit. Like, let's say user registration. That's something that users do when they are first registering to use your system, but it's not going to get used as much as the day-to-day activities within the system. So you're not paying for the systems that aren't getting hit a lot, the functions that aren't being used a lot. And so overall, you end up saving a lot of money. And for AWS, for example, you get 1 million function hits in a month for free. This is assuming that you have short-running functions. If you have very long-running functions, then you have other problems that we can deal with in a separate talk. But if you have short-running functions, lots of small ones, then in a month, you may not actually pay anything. So your code could be completely free, which allows us as developers to be able to prototype things. It allows us as consultants to be able to put together systems pretty easily for customers where we can show them very quickly the return on their investment. And they're not paying for it, which customers like. They like agile. And as soon as we start to say, well, this architecture fits into your goal of being completely agile, then they get very excited. And so these are the 4 main products, functions as a service products that exist within cloud platforms. I mean, there are others like, Kubeless or OpenFaaS that are related to Docker and Kubernetes, and those are great, but I don't typically focus on those when I'm talking about serverless architecture, because they're more of the corner cases, because you do have to do a lot of management there. If I have to start managing containers, then I don't feel like I'm truly taking full advantage of serverless architecture. That is my opinion. And I understand why, for companies, they would want to have a lot of control over the runtimes for their functions as a service. And so that solves that problem. Because, for example, on Google, you only have the option of Node 6. So if you want to use an older or newer version of Node, if you want to use Python, if you want to use C#, you can't. Amazon has a lot of different runtimes. They pretty much cover most of what you would ever want to do. If you're using anything that runs on a JVM, you can use AWS Lambda. IBM is also interesting because they have lots of different runtimes as well, but they also give you an option of creating your own Docker container with your own runtime and deploying that to IBM Bluemix. So you still get the cloud management of your container, but you create the runtime. So there's a little bit of management there, but less management. So here in order, I've got Lambda, Azure Functions. It's now called IBM Cloud Functions and Google Cloud Functions. And right now, Google Cloud Functions are in beta. So at this point, they're still making API changes, but they're pretty minimal. A year ago when I was talking about it, the API changes were happening a lot, and it was pretty much not usable except in the case of prototypes. So we'll go back to serverless architecture and talk about sort of this event-driven nature and about how FaaS fits into that. Because now we have functions that are triggered by other cloud services. So if I have, let's say, a worker that I want to run every so often, now I use an event to trigger that. It's now a very small function, and I'm using an Azure timer, or I'm using CloudWatch events in AWS, and those services, which are free essentially, are now firing events that trigger my functions. So now I have this completely event-driven system. I'm not executing a function with another piece of code. It's all happening within services. And so here I've got storage, like in AWS, S3 also can fire events. If I add or remove something from a bucket and I want to be notified, it will fire an event, and I can then use notification service within AWS, or I can use Twilio and write my own Lambda to send emails that way. IoT, which is one of our favorites within my team at CloudReach. If I have a robot, then I can basically turn that robot into a pub sub system where I am subscribing to queues, and I just, I can publish events from the robot to these queues, and then these queues can now be an event trigger for Lambdas or any other services. So now you have this really powerful pub sub system that is controlled by a robot. So that's pretty cool. Database actions, API gateway. API gateway is really powerful for me because I really want to get away from writing code. I want everyone to get away from writing code. I feel like that is where a lot of mistakes happen, is when we want to write everything ourselves. So in the last year, I have not used Express or Happy in the node.js environment to create an HTTP server, because I've just been doing everything cloud native, and I use an API gateway for all my REST APIs. So if I look back on all of my previous Node apps and I look at all the code that is related to using Happy or Express, that's a lot of code that's now in the Amazon ecosystem. Queues and topics, services like Kinesis and SNS. There's a lot of ways to move messages around within systems too. And when you're talking about a cloud platform like Amazon that has 12 different event sources to trigger Lambdas, then the system is it's really a lot less code that you're writing, and it's a lot less executions that you're writing, and it's a lot less of functions that you've created calling other code that you've created. And so just naturally, these functions are microservices. And so, adding another buzzword here. So this is another thing that makes your CIOs very, very excited, is when you start talking about microservices. And they don't really know what that means, but they know that they're supposed to be doing it. So really, when you're looking at modernizing systems and you're looking at breaking apart monoliths, when you're looking at, okay, I need lots of small functions that I can deploy independently, that I don't have to deploy this gigantic system. And when one function has a bug in it, it now takes everything down. That doesn't happen anymore. All of the value that you get from a microservices architecture is now built into serverless architecture, because just by nature of designing something with all of these functions as a service, you're now getting all of these benefits. And then, of course, all of these functions now work together, just like microservices, to power a much bigger application. So yeah, like I said, Taylor absolutely approves, because now one of the things that we find to be really important to us as software developers is decoupling. And this is also something that now happens naturally. Now we have a microservices architecture. We now have an event-driven architecture where your services are now never coupled together. Everything's independent, everything's separate, everything's working together. And I mean, and this does sound like a bit of a utopia. So we're not, just because we have this highly decoupled system doesn't mean that we stop doing the things that we would always do, like having really great documentation, like committing our code to source control, like using static code analysis, all of, like writing unit tests. Every single one of these nano services now should have unit tests, and it's going to have unit tests and now integration tests, because there are other services that are cloud dependent. And so, now, I mean, I think at this point you should probably be completely in love with serverless architecture, but, I'm just going to keep driving my point home, and why it makes a great partner. And, as I said, dedicated, flexible, supportive, resilient, growth potential, scalability. It's, you're not worried about, hey, I'm creating this prototype, but this prototype works. Where do I go from here? When I'm ready to create the actual system, then, I have to worry about spinning up more VMs or something. That's not the case. All that's done for you. And of course, speaks many languages. Pretty much any language that you use, we can find a built-in runtime, or you can build one using OpenWhisk, or like I said, some of the other services like Kubeless or FaaS. So yeah, I mean, let's now look at a little bit of the dark side. Like, what if I'm scared of commitment? Because that's what everyone asks about when we're talking about going to the cloud. And we're talking about using cloud services. And we're talking about going cloud native. Like, now I'm super tied into this cloud platform. And what if I don't want to commit? What if I'm not sure? What if I don't know? Well, the good news is that all of these cloud platforms, I mean, first of all, they're very huge and popular and have lots of money, and it would be in their best interest to be as flexible as possible and to keep you on their platform. But they're also all very similar. They all have services that do a lot of the same thing. So if you know one cloud platform really well, then you can mostly move a lot of that knowledge over to another one. And it's, and since we're not writing a lot of code, which, that's how you stay more agnostic, of course, is writing more and more code. But even then, if you're using these built-in services, it's still, you can still take what you're doing in that service and translate it over to another cloud platform. And so in the serverless architecture environment, kind of not thinking about DevOps and how you set up other services within the cloud, because that's kind of a whole nother discussion. But overall, when you're talking about ops or just FaaS, the actual, serverless code portion of this, then I'm going to recommend that you embrace frameworks. And hopefully everyone doesn't just sign off the webinar right now and they're like, forget it, we hate frameworks. Well, like, this framework I really recommend, and that's because it's completely open source. And despite a lot of really great competition, it's staying sort of at the top of the group of all the other serverless frameworks that are out there. Apex, Architect, Chef. And a lot of the reason is because serverless framework is the only one that is multi-platform right now. And it's not perfect. I will tell everyone I really wish that it used Terraform instead of using, CloudFormation or whatever proprietary cloud, infrastructure as code platform or kind of proprietary system within each cloud. Like, I wish it didn't use that. I wish it would just use another agnostic tool under the covers. But I think that they're finding a happy medium with this framework that does a certain amount of abstraction and automation without using yet another framework under the covers and just sort of hiding the functionality completely. So they're sort of like they're kind of towing the edge there. But if you look at if you're thinking about using serverless framework, I mean, definitely check out their GitHub repo. There's lots of examples, and I've been using it pretty much since I started developing, because while I'm talking about how easy it is to set up a serverless architecture, one of the immediate problems I ran into was trying to set up code on AWS, trying to deploy a Lambda that had lots of dependencies, and then I tried to set up the API gateway manually through the console, and it was just really difficult, and I just felt like it wasn't scalable. I felt like I didn't have any code to check into GitHub, that I was just taking code locally and zipping it up and putting it somewhere, and it just didn't feel right to me. I really wanted my entire ecosystem where I have continuous integration, where I can still use Travis CI. But then I needed something that would automatically package up all my code and deploy it as it should be deployed. And setting up other sorts of services like, logging or setting up triggers and that sort of thing. So I'm going to talk about serverless framework a little bit, because this is really my answer to kind of getting over your commitment phobia, but also getting started with serverless development, because I've been talking about a lot of theoretical concepts, but I feel like as developers, we really need to get our feet wet. We really need to just get right in there and start typing stuff and deploying things before we can really get a feel for what the environment is like. And so essentially this is what it looks like. The application itself is Node.js, but it supports all of the runtimes within the cloud platforms. So while I'm doing a node setup here, if I want to use Python inside of my Lambdas, I can still do that. And so right here, I'm creating a service, cat name service, and then I'm deploying it. And so these are basically all of the steps at the top to deploy a function. This is to AWS and Node.js, which is just the default across the board. And then at the bottom is what I end up with. So there's my service. I have a package JSON, since this is Node.js, a serverless YAML, which is your configuration for this service that you set up, and then your handler, which is your code. And so I included the dog name service under there too, just to kind of show you what services would look like within one repo, because they're set up kind of as mono repos. And since this is a multi-platform tool, each one of those services could be a different language. It could be a different cloud platform. So cat could be Node.js on AWS, and dog could be C# on Azure. And so this is what a typical serverless YAML looks like. So this is a cat name service. And this is pretty basic, but basically I'm just setting up an API gateway with so that I can get my cat name from cats/name. And just this little bit here, this basically sets up all of the API gateway nonsense within the AWS console that I hate to do. And it's just a few lines here. I mean, that was really the magic for me when I first started using it. And this is what handler.js looks like. So this is some, pretty basic code in here. And this is what a typical format looks like for AWS. And so now this is kind of the difference between a Lambda and a Google Cloud function. As far as what the code looks like, still pretty similar. The signature is just slightly different. And if you're using serverless framework, they guide you through the differences there and installing the different plugins. So Now I'm going to do a little demo. And so this demo is the same demo that I did a year ago. I went through and sort of modernized it a little bit. And this one right now is built on AWS. I have an Azure version that is not quite ready for prime time, which might actually just lead into the next webinar, which is on Azure Functions. So hopefully I'll get it deployed soon. And then, you know, that might make a better tie between the two talks. But I already have this deployed. So right now, if you want to go to Twitter and mention these cats tweet in a tweet with this hashtag, then you'll get a response back. But to kind of like take things a little bit farther, first of all, here, this is my GitHub repository, which I just noticed has 2 issues. I don't know if they're actually user contributed or 2 of mine, but this is the Valentine's Day bot. And since I'm working on making this multi-provider, I've got an AWS folder, which has all of my information in here, my handlers, my libraries, and all of my tests that I used for this Valentine's Day bot. And what essentially it's doing right now is it's using a cron job. It's using AWS CloudWatch events, and it watches for mentions. And when it finds a mention that has a hashtag in it, it favorites it, and then it sends you a response back with a picture that I put in the S3 bucket. And so here's the code here locally. This is the README. This is the AWS folder with all of my handlers, everything we just saw in GitHub. But what I want to do now is actually, I will add a response. So these are the different responses that you can get for tweets. So we'll just, add a new one here. Let's see that'd be bad.
Linda, no one can see your code.
No?
Nope, we just see GitHub.
Oh, really?
And GitHub's nice, don't get us wrong.
All right. Well, let me finish typing and then I'll I promise I'm doing stuff. Thanks for letting me
hear you typing.
Huh. So now you can see GitHub, right?
Yep.
But if I change, so I'm alt-tabbing to VS Code, but you cannot see it.
No VS Code.
Well, that sucks.
Are you sharing your app or are you sharing your screen?
I'm sharing my app.
Yeah, you might have to change which app you're sharing.
Let me go back over here. Hello, Infinity. All right. Hi, Kevin.
Kevin's expanded face because they don't know how to do proper image resizing.
All right, let's try this. Can you see code now?
Code, yes, I see code.
Yay! All right. All right, so I added this line 9 was what I was typing before. And this is all kind of the same code that was on GitHub before. I'm also going to go, this is my serverless YAML. And down here under the events is sort of the magic for the cron. And I'm saying like every 2 minutes, go through and look for replies. And so what I'm going to do is just change that to 1 minute. And then I'm going to deploy this. So the idea is I'm just going to like show how easy it is to redeploy this bot. So while I'm deploying, if you're tweeting, it doesn't matter because it'll stop for a minute. And then when it goes back, it's going to do another poll of the tweets. But once I make a change like that, really though, all I need to do in my terminal, except to make sure I'm in the same folder as the serverless YAML, is I just serverless deploy. And then I'll do -v so that you can kind of see some of the magic. Pull this up. So basically the deployment here is it's packaging up all of the files that I have within my service. It's also packaging up my node modules. If there are libraries that exist within AWS, like the AWS SDK, or there's like some other random useful libraries that Lambda just automatically includes, just sort of as a favor to you. So if you're doing something basic or you're using some of their tutorials within the cloud, that you don't have to update. I'm looking like I think I have a failure here. That's because I did not pay homage to the demo gods. It's like amateur hour here. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see if we have to deploy it again. Actually, it looks like that update is still probably going to be okay. We'll let it keep going. So yeah, any of those libraries are already built in. It automatically knows not to package those. And if you want it to go ahead and package them. Oh, I don't think. Oh, you know what? Oh, look at that. There's no 1 minutes. Doing a little live debugging. So yeah, I needed to be 1 minute and not 1 minute. So maybe I should deploy this again. But basically, it has some smarts kind of built into it, but some things you can override as well. If you want to make sure you're using like the latest version of the SDK versus whichever one is deployed to Lambda, those are things you can control too. For most people that are starting out with serverless framework, the biggest issue that everyone has is that they don't format their YAML correctly. And it does kind of give you some weird error messages when that's the case. And so, but that's sort of the major thing. There's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of community support. So if you run into a problem, chances are someone's already had it and they've done a pull request or they're talking about it. So right now, yeah, it's just using CloudFormation to do all this deployment. And then what it will do is when it creates this CloudFormation template, it will then save that. And then it will just continue to use the same one until you make changes. You can also in the serverless YAML add your own CloudFormation code in there. I really try not to do that because I'm trying to stay a little bit more cloud agnostic. So I'm trying to, not put as much CloudFormation code within the serverless framework, and then maybe handle those sorts of ops jobs with Terraform or some sort of other tool outside of the framework, just to keep things where they're not quite so tied to AWS as far as the tooling goes. And then that way too, people need to know the basics of serverless framework, but they don't have to be CloudFormation experts to use it, because if they already knew CloudFormation really, really well, they probably wouldn't even need this framework at all. So anyway, this is what the deployment looks like. This is the name of my service. It gives me a little bit of information here about my different functions. So now I'm going to go back here and go to my tweets. So this is my These Cats tweet Twitter account, and see if anyone's tweeted today. All right, cool. So these are all the people that tweeted. Let's look at our tweets. And then we should have some replies here. I just redeployed, so let me go back. I may have to, let's see. So none of these have been favorited yet, so the bot has not found them. All right, so just Blaine and Joe were brave enough to tweet my bot. So I can go here. These are my this is my AWS, my logs. There's none of my special information here though. All right, so it has not found any tweets yet. I'm almost running out of time, so I may give up on this and move to questions. Kevin, I thought I was going to have trouble taking up the hour, but apparently I like listening to myself talk without an audience.
You're fine. Bring on the chat, everyone. Your hardest questions. Everyone.
Your first question cannot be, why isn't your bot working?
This is a good presentation, cool. Linda, but why does it not work?
Yeah, well, you can always fix it later. That's what happens, though. I mean, it's really important that you pay homage to your demo gods, because if you don't, they will fail you in the middle of a presentation every time. Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, my bot's probably stopped working. There probably is no 1 minute or something, but all right. So I'll go back to the webinar and stop sharing my screen, and then we'll have a chat. All right. Yeah. All right. Yeah, Paul. Actually, it was working last night because I went and fired it back off against some of your tweets yesterday. So yeah, what I just deployed, I think probably just works. Yeah, so Joe's question is new coders. Should they learn serverless? For new coders, I would not say, if they're should I learn serverless? I would say, don't try to learn AWS or Azure. That's a big piece to chew. But what I just demonstrated, where you set up serverless framework and you're basically writing code and deploying code, that's still pretty basic, and that's still it's within the constraints of serverless framework, but that's still the basics that you would teach any new person. Hey, you write some code, you write a test for it, you test it, and then you deploy it. Except here, you're really getting rid of a lot of the risk of deploying to Heroku, or there's a lot of cases too where you're teaching something like node.js or Python or something, and then they're like, okay, great, I just wrote all this code where I can tell the difference between 18 letters in this word and 5 letters in this word, but when do I build a website? Well, so then you're like, okay, kids, now we're gonna write an HTTP server, and so now it starts getting really deep. And so that's one thing I like about this, is because you can show them how to write code, and then you can set up an API gateway pretty easily. And then they just have a REST API already out of the box. They didn't have to actually write it. And then you can kind of talk about, okay, this is what this API gateway actually does and what it replaces. But you're in a, hour-long workshop or something, you're not expecting someone to know a lot, because it gets really overwhelming for new people. So I would say, yes, I would start them out with serverless framework, the most basic, and then work from there, and then not come at it hey, you're learning serverless architecture, but more you're learning how to write code and prototype easily. What's the next question?
I'm waiting for someone to ask the question. Can I do serverless on premise?
Yeah, you can with OpenWhisk.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. I was being facetious, but so then you have to have a server for your serverless.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really serverless anyway, but I heard the story of how serverless came about, who first coined that, and I don't remember now, but it was just something Something someone said, and like I said, I'm really like fearful of these CIO magazines and newsletters because we deal with a lot of those type of people, in consulting work. And they're always like, yeah, I just got this email that said we need a data lake. And then, you have to know how to respond to that because they're very excited.
It's like a Dilbert cartoon in the making.
Yes.
Yeah, you're on the second frame.
So many pointy-headed bosses.
Yeah.
All right.
Alan had a question.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So Alan is asking if there are any areas that transition to serverless easier than others, low-hanging fruit, and absolutely. And so this is another talk that I gave. I feel really strongly about is the fact that this all comes down to money too, right? Because if you go to a company and you say you have a monolith, gross, get rid of that thing. That's a lot of money. I mean, and this is a gigantic app probably that a lot of people have written, and they're not just going to throw that away and give you $1 million to rewrite it. That's ridiculous. Most places are going to want to say, okay, give me a plan for a very phased approach where I can break this thing apart and start, handling like the low hanging fruit, so to speak. And so I think one of the super easy places is like your workers, your functions that just run all the time, like a cron. And that's basically what I'm doing with this bot. Just assume the bot actually worked. So like something like CloudWatch events or like in Azure, the Azure timer like service, that's really, really cool. And you can just take a lot of these workers and just take that code, move it into a Lambda or an Azure function, and then just have a cron job fire it off. And so that sounds super easy, but like most services have these workers that you can attack pretty easily. Also, I was talking about API gateway. If you have a lot of, REST services, it's, you can start separating out some smaller areas into, microservices, and then you can put an API gateway in front of them. And suddenly you're starting to move a REST API very slowly over into a serverless environment. Yeah, I think that, and it's also too with like sort of this idea of these event-driven architectures, you can start thinking back to like, the enterprise service bus concept. And when I was in Java development, that was a huge deal. And you can start to create those also with serverless, where, maybe you're using your monolith to fire events, and you have this pub subsystem in between that's now taking events from your system that's on-prem, or maybe it's inside of a VM. And now those events are now triggering services and Lambdas that exist outside of the monolith. And so you're just sort of like subtracting stuff from it until it becomes smaller. And then as your system becomes smaller, it becomes cheaper, and then it becomes more manageable, less money, everyone's happy. Put some AI on it. No, blame. Bad. Bad.
That's the future.
Yeah, that's another CIO magazine thing is AI can do everything for you. You can fire all your employees if you use AI. So what other questions?
Bring it on.
You don't ask questions. Kevin has to ask questions.
I don't have any questions.
Kevin's like,
no. It is kind of interesting. We're seeing, I'm seeing over on the Azure side, they just released this new thing called Event Grid. And it's kind of the new, I have a very rough understanding of how it all works, but it's like, all right, just send all your events into Event Grid, and then have things that can receive the events that know what to do. They can be a function, they could be another service or another app altogether. And it's like everything's flowing through the Event Grid, and all this code just magically works. And I have to imagine in about 2 years, we're going to have a new set of talks like, my serverless app is out of control. I don't know how to debug it. It's like, I just have too much going on.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, we're already seeing that too, right? Because it's a little too easy. And when you make things too easy, people like to forget all their teaching. Like, I don't need a unit test for this. It's managed by the server. No, okay, you still have to test your code, right? It's still code that you wrote. Or I don't have to document this. It like exists in the cloud and you can just see it.
Yep.
And so, but yeah, I think the thing I like about Azure is that Azure is just really they're trying to make serverless architecture work for like non-coders. They want to get it to a point where like an end user almost, or someone who doesn't know how to code but understands kind of logic or architecture can go in and just start, dragging things around and basically make an app. Because there's Event Grid and then there's logic apps. When I saw logic apps, I was like, whoa, the future is drag and drop. Like, yeah, I mean,
I was having a conversation last night with a friend of mine, and he was saying how he has a live webcam on in the front of his house. And what happens is when it detects movement, it takes a snapshot, runs it through Azure, it goes through Azure Event Grid into Azure Cognitive Services. So it looks at the picture and says, there's a car in this picture, and there's a human in this picture, or there's a cat in this picture. And then if any of the keywords match, it then sends it to Twilio. Twilio sends him the picture and then says, I see a human in your front lawn. Or I see a cat in your front lawn. And he wrote 50 lines of code to make all this work. It's just all magic.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what my cat detector does. My cat detector talk was pretty much that. Like I used recognition and, Lambda. And then, I did a version of it that was using like, IBM Cloud Functions and Watson. And and I mean, as long all those services exist, I don't know AI, but it was a service that exists within the cloud and there was an API to use it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really anything you want to do now, it becomes a lot cheaper, not just man hours, but also just the serverless nature of metered billing makes everything so much cheaper. I see the hot issue from Troy.
Troy's trolling.
Yeah, no, I have a good question. I have a good answer for that one. Go. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, so first of all, your code is running in a container. So if you like serverless, you don't hate containers. You just don't want to ever manage them. Like I love containers. I don't want to have to know a whole lot about how Kubernetes and Docker work as a developer. But there's a limitation within these microservices and nanoservices. And that's that for some cases, you're going to have a long running service. And there are limitations to how long code can run inside of a Lambda or an Azure function. So for long running services, that's where you go to a container. So I like to look at like you try to go as serverless as possible. And if it doesn't make sense to use a Lambda, then absolutely you write that code and you containerize it. Yeah, no, Troy knew that I had an answer for that. Because, I mean, every serverless talk I've done, I've had people on Twitter go, what's wrong with containers? And I'm like, they're great. I don't want to manage them. That's not my job. I don't care. Brett Fisher can manage all your containers. Or Troy, if they're Kubernetes.
For the right price, absolutely.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, we'll go ahead and stop it there. We're at the top of the hour. So thank you again, Linda, for joining us. And thank you to everyone who has been participating in the chat. And we'll be back in a couple weeks. And if this is your first Swift Kick show, you'll get an email from me just thanking you for showing up. And hopefully you'll come back to future ones. Greatly appreciate it.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, yes. Great. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
All right.
Take care.
All right. Bye.